If you're into horror movies, you've probably seen The Strangers, right? That really terrifying idea of people breaking into a remote house for, like, no reason, just to do awful things. Well, what if I told you that whole nightmare scenario might have been inspired by something real, a true story that's still a deeply unsettling mystery? Today, we're going to talk about a really chilling case, the Keddie cabin murders from 1981. Picture this: a small, kind of rustic resort town deep in the Sierra Nevadas in Northern California, usually peaceful, But that peace was shattered. 3 people found brutally murdered in a cabin, another missing, her remains found years later. And the investigation, well, let's just say it was plagued with problems from the start. It just made everything murkier. Okay, let's unpack this. It starts back in the fall of 1980. Sue Sharp, she'd separated from her husband and moved cross-country with her 5 kids, from Connecticut all the way to Northern California. They ended up renting Cabin 28 at the Keddie Resort. Seems like a good place for a fresh start, Remote, quiet. Her kids were John, Sheila, Tina, Ricky, and little Greg.
So fast forward to the evening of April 11th, 1981. It starts out pretty normal. Sue lets her sons, Ricky, who was 10, and Greg, only 5, have a friend over. Justin, he was 12. His family lived nearby in another cabin. Sue's older daughter, Sheila, she's 14. She had plans to stay the night next door with the Siebel family. She left around just after 8 p.m. Then Tina, who's 12, she came about 9:30 p.m. She'd been watching TV over the Siebels too. Later that night, the oldest son, John, he's 15, he gets back with his friend Don, and they'd apparently been partying nearby. So you've got 7 people in cabin 28 that night: Sue, John, Donna, Tina, Ricky, Greg, and their friend Justin. But by the next morning, 3 of them would be dead, murdered, and 1 would be gone, vanished. The next morning, April 12, around 7:45, Sheila Sharp comes home from the Siebel's cabin. The second she opens the door, she smells something awful. An offensive smell is how it was described. And then she saw it. Just an absolutely horrific scene. Her mother, Sue Sharp, her brother John, and John's friend Donna Wingate, dead in the living room. The details that came out later, and they're really gruesome. All 3 were bound.
Adhesive tape, electrical wire. They found 2 bloody knives and a hammer at the scene. One of the knives, a steak knife, was actually bent almost in half, just like extreme force must have been used. And the blood spatter showed it all happened right there in the living room. Sue Sharp. She was found on her side by the sofa, naked from the waist down, gagged with a bandana and her own underwear, taped up, stab wounds in her chest, her throat slashed. That's weird detail, an imprint on her head that matched the butt of a BB gun. John Sharp, her son, also had his throat slashed. And Donna Wingate, she had multiple head injuries, and she'd been strangled. All 3 in signs of blunt force trauma to the head. Later, they determined it was from a hammer. Sheila, understandably, just ran straight back to the Siebelts, screaming. Just screaming for help. Expert, this is really where the investigation side of things starts to go wrong, isn't it? Almost immediately.
Oh, absolutely. The response was, well, deeply flawed, is putting it mildly. The very first sort of critical error. James Siebel, the neighbor Sheila ran to, he goes into the cabin himself, through the back door, checking for survivors.
Which you can understand, him wanting to help, but...
Exactly. Good intentions, but disastrous for the investigation. He contaminated the scene right away. Who knows what evidence was disturbed or lost just from that.
And that was really just the beginning of the problems with the Plymouth County Sheriff's handling of it. The scene wasn't properly secured, evidence could have been lost or compromised. And maybe the most shocking thing, it took them hours, literally hours, to realize Tina Sharp was missing. How does that even happen?
It's baffling, really. When you have a scene like that and a child is unaccounted for. And Justin, one of the boys in the cabin, apparently tried to tell the officers Tina wasn't there, but he was ignored for hours. Yeah, when you have those kinds of failures right at the start, scene contamination, not realizing someone's missing, it handicaps the entire investigation moving forward. You're already playing catch-up, and doubt gets cast on everything found later.
And because there was so much blood in the living room, but they also found blood drops on Tina's bed. The initial theory was that maybe she wasn't killed there. Maybe she was abducted, possibly for rape. Horrifying thought, but it just shows the confusion right from the get-go. As they did start looking around, more strange details popped up. There was a bloody footprint outside in the yard, knife marks, like someone just scoring the walls inside the cabin. An unidentified fingerprint on the handrail by the back door. And inside, the phone was off the hook. All the lights were off, drapes closed, almost like someone tried to make it seem like nothing happened or delay discovery. Oh, and later they found a knife in a trash can at the Keddie General Store nearby. They thought it might be connected. But then you get the witness accounts and they just don't line up. Sheila and the Siebold family next door, they said they heard nothing. No commotion, nothing unusual during the night. But then another couple, a bit further away but still nearby, they reported being woken up around 1:30 a.m. by muffled screaming. They couldn't tell where it was coming from, apparently, so they went back to sleep. Expert, this is the part that always gets me. Muffled screaming heard by neighbors, intense violence happening. Yet 3 young boys are supposedly asleep, undisturbed, in the very next room.
Right. And why leave them unharmed? Why kill 3 people so brutally and just leave the boys?
That's one of the central, most baffling questions of the case. The selectivity is strange. Does it mean the boys weren't the target? Or that the killers had some specific motive focused only on Sue, John, and Donna? Or maybe even Tina?
Or perhaps they didn't want more witnesses. But leaving witnesses seems counterintuitive too.
Precisely. And the idea of them sleeping through it all, it stretches credulity, doesn't it? Especially with reports of screaming. It raises questions about whether their accounts are fully accurate, maybe due to trauma, or if something else was going on. Maybe they were somehow incapacitated. It's huge inconsistency.
And speaking of the boys' accounts, Justin, the friend who was staying over, he later underwent hypnosis to try and recall more. Under hypnosis, he said he was watching TV in the bedroom with Ricky and Greg when he heard strange noises from the living room. He claimed he saw Sue with 2 men. He described them. One had a mustache, long hair. The other was clean-shaven, short hair. Both apparently wore glasses. Then, Justin said, John and Donna came in and started arguing really heatedly with these 2 men, and the argument just exploded into a fight, violence. And crucially, he said Tina came into the room during all this chaos, and one of the men grabbed her and took her out the back door. Based on this, police released sketches of the 2 men.
Now, Justin's hypnotic recall gives us this narrative of like a spontaneous, escalating fight. It's vivid. But here's the problem. You look in the crime scene, the physical evidence.
The findings.
Exactly. Sue, John, Donna, they were all bound with tape and wire. That doesn't really scream spur-of-the-moment brawl, does it? That suggests control, deliberation, maybe even torture. It points towards something more planned, or at least the situation the killers brought under control. So there's a real tension between Justin's account and the physical evidence left behind.
And the investigation soon started looking closer to home, specifically at Justin's own family. The Smarts. Marilyn Smart, Justin's mother, she made a claim later on that she found a bloody jacket. Tina's jacket, she said, in her basement, and she turned it in to the police. But weirdly, there's no official record of that ever happening. No record. That's odd. Very odd. And her husband, Martin Smart, Justin's stepfather, he also told police a claw hammer had gone missing from their house around that time, which naturally put some suspicion on them. Martin Smart gave his own account of that night, April 11th. He said he and this friend, John Boot, a guy he knew from the VA hospital, they were both apparently treated for PTSD, had stopped by Sue Sharp's cabin earlier in the evening. Then he said they went to a local bar. Martin apparently got angry about the music, went home, complained to Marilyn, then went back to the bar with Booty for more drinks. The expert, what jumps out at you about these initial statements?
Well, what's really striking and frankly quite concerning from an investigative standpoint is just how many inconsistencies and frankly outright lies there seem to be in Martin's and Boots' stories. And the fact that the Department of Justice investigators who looked into it seemed to just gloss over them.
Yeah, gloss over seems like an understatement.
Right. These weren't minor discrepancies. They should have been huge red flags. It really points to some serious shortcomings in that early follow-up.
Absolutely. I mean, Booth lied about basic facts, claimed he was a Chicago cop for 18 years, totally untrue, lied about how long he'd lived in Keddie, even lied about his relationship with Marilyn Smart, claiming she was his niece, and his claim he'd never even met Sue Sharp. That directly contradicted what Marilyn said about him and Martin stopping by Sue's cabin together.
Exactly. Lie after lie.
And then Martin Smart himself says this incredibly chilling thing to investigators. He mentions his stepson, Justin, saying something like, my stepson, Justin, who was there the night of the murders, might have seen something without me detecting him. Right. How does that not set off major alarm bells? But apparently it didn't. He also mentioned his missing hammer, but no follow-up interviews with the Smarts or Butte. The investigators just concluded they weren't involved. And maybe it's relevant, maybe not, but it's often mentioned that Martin Smart was apparently good friends, best buds, with the county sheriff at the time. Makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It certainly raises questions about potential conflicts of interest, or at the very least, whether the investigation was pursued with equal rigor against all potential leads.
So years go by. 3 years later, 1984, a piece of a human skull, the cranium, is found by someone boggle hunting about 100 miles away from Keddie. Then, months after that, an anonymous call comes into the sheriff's office. The caller says the skull belongs to Tina Sharp. They were never able to identify who made that call. Searches in the area where the skull was found turned up more remains, a jawbone, other bones, and testing confirmed it. It was Tina. Near where they found her bones, they also found a child's blanket, a blue nylon jacket, a pair of Levi's jeans, and an empty dispenser for surgical tape. Just heartbreaking remnants. The cabin itself, Cabin 28, was finally demolished in 2004. You'd think maybe that was the end of the story, but it wasn't. Things got really interesting again years later. In 2008, there was a documentary made about the murders, and in it, Marilyn Smart, Justin's mother, Martin's wife, she went on camera and said she suspected her husband, Martin Smart, and his friend John Bood were the ones responsible for all 4 murders. Sue, John, Donna, and Tina. And then get the bombshell. Martin Smart had actually confessed. He died back in 2000. But not long after he died, his therapist contacted the sheriff's office. The therapist revealed that Martin had confessed to murdering Sue Sharp and Tina Sharp. His reasons, chillingly mundane almost.
Yeah.
He killed Sue, he said, because she was trying to convince Marilyn to leave him. And Tina. He killed Tina because, in his words, she saw the whole thing. I couldn't have a witness. He even apparently bragged to the therapist about beating the polygraph test years earlier. Said something like, I was lying in the polygraph and they let me go. John Boat, the friend, he had died way back in 1988, so obviously couldn't be questioned about any of this. Then more corroboration seemed to surface. A 2016 article in the Sacramento Bee newspaper reported on a letter Martin Smart had sent to Marilyn, his wife, shortly after the murders happened back in '81. The letter ended with this absolutely bone-chilling line. I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives.
Wow. That's incredibly damning.
Right. And then, just a month before that article came out, in March 2016, investigators found a hammer in a local pond. A hammer that matched the description Martin Smart himself had given of the one he claimed went missing back in 1981. The sheriff at the time said the location suggested it was deliberately hidden there. Intentionally put there, were his words. So it really felt like, okay, case closed. Finally.
It certainly seems like a very compelling convergence of evidence, doesn't it? You have the confession relayed by the therapist, you have that incredibly incriminating letter, and then the discovery of a weapon matching the description hidden in a place that suggests concealment.
Yeah, feels pretty definitive. But knowing these cases, there's always something more, isn't there?
Well, confessions, especially posthumous ones relayed secondhand, always need careful scrutiny. You have to ask, does it account for all the facts? Does it explain everything at the crime scene? The therapist's account is powerful, the letter's deeply disturbing, the hammer is significant circumstantial evidence. But remember those initial investigation flaws. Remember the inconsistencies. A confession tells a story, but is it the whole story? Especially when the foundation of the case was so shaky to begin with.
And that's exactly it, because this mystery, incredibly, is still not over. In April 2018, there was another announcement. DNA evidence, recovered from a piece of adhesive tape found back at the original crime scene in 1981. And that DNA matched a known living suspect.
And that is the twist that throws everything back into question, doesn't it? If Martin Smart confessed to killing Sue and Tina, and the evidence points strongly towards him and Bood, who is this other person, this known living suspect whose DNA was physically at the scene on the tape used to bind the victims?
Yeah.
It suggests the possibility of an additional participant who was never caught. Or maybe it points away from Smart and Boot entirely for certain aspects of the crime. Or perhaps the situation was even more complex than Martin's confession indicated. That DNA could be the key, but it also reopens so many possibilities that seemed closed.
So the Keddie cabin murders is just this enduring, awful puzzle. You have this incredibly brutal crime and investigation that was just flawed from day one, missing chances. Then you get these chilling confessions seemingly years later. The letter, the hammer, feels like answers. But then this piece of DNA evidence just blows it all open again. More questions than answers, even after all this time. Who really did it? Was it just Smart and Butte? Was this living suspect involved? What other secrets are still buried in that small town? And will that DNA finally truly bring some kind of closure? We hope this deep dive into the Keddie cabin murders has given you a lot to think about. The complexity of these true crime cases, the way mysteries can linger for decades. It's heavy stuff. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We always encourage you, keep looking at the facts, question the stories you hear, and keep searching for the truth. Until next time, stay curious.